Welcome, everyone. My name is Eric Pennington, and welcome to a new, actually, this is a part 2 videocast that we're doing for the mental health and well-being at Violet. And joining me is Anita Rowe with Directions Counseling. Hi, Anita. How are you?
Hello. Good. Thanks for having me.
Well, many of you who are watching this might remember Anita from obviously the first video cast that we did, and then also when we did the in-person event back in early October of this year. We had talked in between, Anita, about, we should really try to do a part 2 because I know the first video cast, it's like time just flew by.
Mm-hmm.
And we're thinking, and actually you were thinking, and you sent me a note and said, hey, an idea for the next video cast, maybe we could talk some more about X, Y, and Z. Well, as many of you out there know, it doesn't take much for me to want to do another video cast. So I said, okay, Anita, absolutely. We'll do a part 2. So today, Anita, again, kind of taking back to that sort of offline conversation we had, I want to start here with core beliefs and healing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, and I think we talked about it at the live session, that there's a lot of trauma, and I have to be careful there. I know there's always been trauma. It's not just because we're in this post, if I can call it, pandemic era, but there's a very strong desire to find healing, after the event, after the situation, after the relationship or whatever. And I remember you mentioning the impact and the importance of core beliefs as it relates to the healing. So can we start there and give us maybe an idea about, what's that all about? And then we'll keep rolling in there.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, we all have core beliefs, right? Some are very healthy, some are not.
Right.
And when we look at how those are developed, they come from childhood, and some of them come from experiences in adulthood as well. But this idea of like, am I acceptable? Can I receive unconditional love? So we all know, when a baby is born, that child does not have to do anything to deserve love, right? In fact, it's not easy to get along with sometimes. Is crying and pooping and spitting up, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to prove anything to have value and worth.
Yeah.
So and what happens though, as that child grows up, somehow things happen in the life that might cause that child to believe that their worth is less, when it's really not. No value of a human being lessens over time. It does not lessen with age. It does not lessen with behavior. Now, there are consequences that come, with bad behavior, but the worth of that person doesn't lessen. So, a preschooler who's now maybe throwing tantrums, it should still deserve to be loved, no matter what happens.
Right.
In fact, any of us who have seen maybe an adult, yell or cuss at their child in the store, we don't look at that child and say, wonder what they did to deserve that. Like, they're crying too much. No wonder the parent is like mad. It doesn't matter if that kid is throwing everything off of the shelf. That child does not deserve to be abused in any way.
Yeah.
Now, we know that as adults looking on, but the child's perception over time is going to get very personal. So they're going to take on some beliefs about themselves because of how they've been treated.
So Anita, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. Could this, or does this connect potentially to like these stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, maybe what I described is maybe not quite the typical, I mean, it's very common, but is it typical in a Christian home? Hopefully not. It's more common than we'd like to admit, but outward abuse, is pretty obvious that the child is going to be affected, right? But then there's unspoken messages, like just being dismissed, being neglected, not being heard or validated. We take on the story we tell ourselves, right? We take on these core beliefs about ourselves based on those things as well. If, let's say they can't have an opinion. They're always, being turned away, not being taken time for. And this could be at any age. Like they might take on the belief that they're not important. They're not significant. They're not lovable in some way. So, and then as an adult, even a child growing up in the best loving home, nurturing, praise, like all their needs are getting met. But any long-term environment is going to create unhealthy core beliefs. So being bullied in school, even though the home life is great, it's going to have an impact. Being in a romantic relationship, even as a teenager, in which they're being mistreated, is going to have an impact. Being in any type of relationship as an adult that is not healthy, long-term is going to have an impact. So there's some things that are like big that create a core belief, something that hits that person really, really hard. So maybe one time in school, like I remember feeling humiliated when a teacher, it's like 5th grade, we're all lined up in the hallways to go to the next class. And this teacher said something about me in front of everybody that humiliated me. And like that had an impact. Like, and I still it's not something like I daily struggle with, but like even as I'm telling you this, like I'm feeling like, oh, like that doesn't feel good, right? It's kind of, just the impact that it has. So sometimes it's a one-time thing, another time it's like repeated incidences. So we take on these beliefs about ourselves or about the world. So sometimes the core belief might be, I can't trust anybody. Right. Because something happened, now you can't trust people, and they keep a guard up, right? So sometimes it's about ourselves, sometimes it's about others. And when we look at, okay, these core beliefs, for one, and we talked a little bit at the live event, are they the truth? Right? How true are these things that we believe about ourselves and others? And sometimes we say, well, this thing happened, that's why I feel that way. So there is some truth to it, but there's never 100% truth to it. In fact, it's usually a small percentage. So let's say somebody's, I don't know, been in 3 relationships in which they've been cheated on. And they might say, well, there's no male, no female who's trustworthy. Like nobody's faithful. And that generalization, because they've had some bad experiences, now that they're looking at the world through that lens.
It's interesting, Anita, I was having this conversation this past week, and it had to do with from a social perspective and ethnic groups. And it was specific to bigotry, racism, that kind of thing. And I said, most people who harbor some level of resentment or anger or animosity toward a quote group of people, if they really were to take a step back and ask themselves, well, how many of that particular group have I actually been around in my lifetime? And I use the example of African Americans. If African Americans make up 25% of the population, that puts you somewhere maybe 30 million people, right? And then I said, now think about how many of those 30 million people have you been around in your lifetime? 200? Maybe, okay. And if I had to, and I said, okay, let's say you've been around 1,000 of those particular people in that group. 1,000 is what percentage of 30 million?
Yeah, don't ask me that.
And I'm not a math person either. I'm going to leave it to the imagination, right?
Yeah,
But the reality of it is we're talking about something like this to the whole that's like that.
Yeah.
And how easily people will, and all of us have in some level, in some form, we've rushed to that place of, okay, this is what it is. And there's just what it is based on what we experience maybe one time and even 2 times.
Yeah.
And that's not to dismiss, Anita, the experience, the hurt, the harm, whatever may have happened. But to your point, to just make a broad statement that because I
Mhm.
experienced X, then all experiences with that group of people or that type of person or whatever it may be can't be good. And I love how you use that analogy, and that's what kind of prompted me thinking
Yeah.
about that idea.
Yeah, I've even, when it comes even to politics, and we're not going to get specific about this, but I've heard, some pretty derogatory comments going one way or the other. And, this person that was saying this was in the military in the past. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, did this political party not stand beside you, protecting you as you're like in harm's way? Like, did you stop and ask them what their political party was before you would trust them with your life? And they're like, well, no. Right. So it's this idea of, again, generalizations based on an idea, a belief, and experience. But what's important about the core beliefs is they're not always accurate, right? Most of the time, the unhealthy ones are not accurate. Now they're valid. They're valid because you had an experience, right? Or maybe you've been taught something.
Yes.
Even in I read an article about abortion once, and the people who have had abortions and feel so much shame about it are the ones who have been taught that it's wrong. It was their core belief that they shouldn't do it, but they did it anyway. Now there's shame and remorse and regret. Those who have been taught that it's a right, that there's nothing wrong with it, they can go on and not feel that shame and that remorse and regret because it's based on core beliefs. So we have both sides there, right? That comes back to what they believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, can those beliefs change? Yes, absolutely. Just like anything. And, when we look at our core beliefs, okay, how many of these things are unhealthy? If I'm thinking derogatory things about myself, my self-worth, or other people, these generalizations that we make that are not healthy because we've had maybe trauma or a bad experience, or we've been taught something, like we have to take a look at that and say, how can I get to a more healthy mindset and perspective?
Because what you're saying there too, Anita, and it keeps reverberating in my brain as you were talking, is that Paul's, I think it was the command, hold every thought captive,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I, it's like many people, followers of Christ, I've heard that verse and read that verse tons and tons of time,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it's been until probably the last 5 years or so where I fully grasped exactly why that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the minefield, the battlefield of my mind is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And if you mentioned, and I know we talked about it at the live session about is this true of what I believe, right? And I think it almost kind of, and I know for me the exercise is, okay, hold on, Eric, pray, now ask the question, is this true? And then I follow it, is it really true? Because there always seems to be, at least for me, Anita,
Mm-hmm.
that pull to want to believe this narrative that typically has me on the low end of the stick, if you will, right?
Well, sure, because you can come up with the reasons why it's true.
Yes, exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly it. Because you can kind of build the story around,
Yep.
oh yeah, because I remember 20 years ago, oh yeah, you know what, last week so-and-so said this to me, and
Yeah.
that proves that. And it's amazing, maybe to me, and I know you as a clinician, there may be more depth to it, but it's like, why is it that we don't go do the other? Oh, no, I'm a child of God. He loves me and he's putting together my life. I may have made a mistake, but all of the positive side about it. So maybe that's for another episode.
Well, part of that is a human flaw, right? We tend to believe the negative more than the positive. And especially when it comes to our experiences. So, and how many people are glass half full versus half empty? I don't know, but a lot of like our shift can depend on that. And the people who have that glass half empty can learn to make it half full, even it's going to take more effort. But
Yeah,
so
and
I'll,
isn't that, do you, I'm cutting you off again. Could that be one of the reasons why Paul would so emphasize over and over? Even you look at his multiple letters that he wrote, it was this continual, I want to remind you, I
Mhm.
always rejoice always. I mean, it's just this, and I'm thinking he knew
Yeah.
that tendency. And I know that
Yeah.
that scriptures doesn't, they don't talk about Paul's perception, how he came to that or why he wrote it, but I think it's very clear with his repetition and reinforcement. So let's talk maybe a little bit here about the healing and how it partners with those core beliefs.
Yeah. So if we envision this a piece of paper, right? So the caption at the top is whatever the core belief is.
Okay.
I'm not good enough. I can't trust anybody. Nobody likes, whatever it is, right? That's the caption at the top of the page. And then we have 3 columns.
Okay.
And the first column are all the reasons that validate that core belief. This
Okay.
happened. They said that. I felt this way. Like which is why I said we can always come up with reasons that support it.
Yep.
That's why it developed in the first place. So that first column are all of the things that support that core belief. The middle column are all of the things that don't support the core belief, but we ignore that fact. We don't ignore the thing. So let's say somebody's core belief is nobody likes me.
Right.
And then they're invited to a gathering or a birthday party. So they go and they enjoy it, but they don't think about the fact that somebody does like me. Okay. So we just ignore the idea that it doesn't match the core belief, because we have to hold true to that core belief, right?
Right.
And then the third column are things that don't match the core belief, but we twist it so that it does. So for example, okay, I was invited to that birthday party, but they were probably just being nice.
Right.
They don't really, they're my sister. They should say things like that. Or
of course they're going to invite me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So again, we make it so that it cannot match the core belief because we hold tight to the core belief.
Right.
So what I have done with myself and what I help clients do is we have to take a look at that middle column. Let's start keeping track of all of the things that do not match the core belief. And let's start to embrace those as truth instead of the things that we can find on that first column that support it. There's so many more in that middle column that we're just ignoring. Yeah. So let's stop the third column. Let's stop twisting it to match, right? Let's pay attention to the middle column. And I encourage people to write it down. Write it down. Like I've written things down. I'm like, there's a lot here. There's a lot here that actually doesn't support my core belief. And when we write it down and we come back and look at it later, so we're adding to the list. Like every time something happens or somebody says something in a positive way that is going against that negative core belief, we're doing something to change how we think about it. So when it comes back to intentionality that you mentioned prior in the other session, is we have to be intentional about what are we thinking? What are we believing? What are we doing about it? When we know our thoughts are unhealthy, but we tend to just embrace this fact that our self-esteem is low. We're not worth changing for. We don't matter to the world. So all of these, like it's really hard to come out of the idea that I am worth changing for. So we have to start to look at these things before we feel that we're worth it. We have to work on it.
Yeah, well, that's really powerful, Anita. And it kind of, I get really excited about the idea of having specific tools and things that you can do that are practical. Because I agree with you in the sense of well, everything you said around that visual of the caption and then the columns. And I think so many of us at times, and I've been in this category where I think I can just naturally summon it, right? Like, oh, of course, I know I'm a worthwhile person. Yes, you're right. Yeah, I am. I know. Thank you. I appreciate that. And
Mhm.
then, a half hour later, I'm debating about whether or not I should even return the phone call because they really don't want to hear from me.
Yeah,
And
because your summoning is superficial thinking. It's
yeah,
not an embrace of the truth.
that's great. That's great. Can,
So,
can you, that's really powerful. So can you unwrap that a little bit more?
yeah. So I sometimes go into the example as I'm telling people, like, when we're working on trauma, okay, what is a safe place for you? Tell me about some place in your life or your imagination, because it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be real, that you feel at peace. And they might tell me about, an experience they had with their children or at grandma's house or at the beach. And like they're telling me, sometimes they light up as they're talking about it, and I know that the brain is associating with the feelings that are there. And if they're not like coming alive with it, then I'm like, okay, what were you feeling in that moment? What was around you? What were you envisioning with your eyes? Like, what was there? What were you seeing? What were you smelling? Like, being in nature, there are smells and sounds and like all these things that we can use our senses for to put us back in that place. So a lot of times when we think about a favorite memory, like our brain automatically goes there because the association is still real. And that's the tricky thing about the brain. It sometimes doesn't know what's real and what's not real, which is why we have triggers and PTSD symptoms, because the brain doesn't know the difference
Yeah.
sometimes, but because of the association. So the good thing is that we can use associations in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, well, I know I'm worth it, I know God loves me, like, yeah, this is rote memory. This is something I've learned. But when I stop and think about, okay, how he died on the cross, like when we watch Passion of the Christ, like how do you not get more detail than that? But
Oh, Anita, I'm a terrible host because what you're saying is it's so compelling to me because I'm thinking about, and I think it must have been from Chuck Swindoll that I might have listened to one of his sermons, and he talked about the importance of placing yourself in the story, right? And
yeah.
you're mentioning about the cross is like I've had those times where I've gone, no, hold on, Eric, what was the cross? Well, my gosh, the cross was a form of execution and torture that the Romans used. It
Mhm.
was it was the cruelest of ways to be punished, to be executed. And then I started going through, he actually subjected himself to the thing that, oh my gosh. And you're
Mhm.
right, Anita, it does it. Then it kind of takes you into, wait a minute, this is not just some, oh, I know he died, na 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 because of road. So yeah, I get that
Mhm.
connection. That's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have to put our state of being into the idea of that safe place, right?
Right.
Or the idea that we are worth something, that we deserve more in life, or what, however we've been treated, or like we're loved by God. And like, instead of just saying it from memory, like, let's
Yep.
put our emotions there, our state of being there, which is
Yeah.
what meditation, like, just being still and calm and placing your whole state of mind somewhere. That's what it's all about when people try to get still,
Mhm.
right? Is
Yeah.
to bring their senses to a discipline that you're in control, rather than the anxiety, the fear, the depressions in control.
Mhm.
So yeah. Now I do want to say, so this is a way to work on core beliefs,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean we can't work on or shouldn't work on trauma. So depending on, what has happened to somebody, just working on the core belief doesn't really unpack the whole impact of a trauma. So
Right.
sometimes those you have to do both, right? Go into the trauma, heal the trauma, and then work on the core beliefs that have happened because of a trauma. But
Yeah.
when there's these overgeneralizations of, so let's say somebody has social anxiety,
Mhm.
And it's never come about because of a bad experience or just an anxious person.
Mhm.
That's when like these simple tools work really well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that distinction, because yeah, I certainly we don't want to portray it as, well, here's the magic silver bullet. If
Yeah.
you do this, you'll be great, because trauma isn't solved that way.
Yeah.
So we have that approach, and I know that's one. I mean, I'm certain there's many.
Hmm.
We talked about trauma. Is there another sort of part of this journey to healing that you'd want to mention or to talk about that could be helpful?
Yeah, I would just say um, it's a little bit different when you're working on a current trauma versus a past trauma.
Mhm.
Um, so if it's current, and I mentioned before, like you're just in survival mode, right? And then with some time, and people say, there's this phrase, time heals all things. It does not. It only does if you're working on it. Okay. Which is why people can stay bitter for 30 years or, they're guarded for 20 years because time doesn't just take it away if you don't look at what you've been through.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, Anita, because if you're not working on it, time is not going to magically make it go away.
Nope. Nope.
I can say that from personal experience. It
Mhm.
wasn't until I was willing to put in the work and to look at it, as you said.
Mhm.
That's a great observation.
Yeah. So working on, being, and so many people are uncomfortable with the difficult emotions. I'm
Yes.
not going to say bad emotions. They're not bad. There's no bad. There's no right or wrong about a feeling, right? People associate feelings. Well, if you're angry, if you're resentful, if, you feel sad, like those are bad feelings. They're not bad feelings. They're just difficult feelings. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable in fresh trauma having difficult feelings. It doesn't feel good at all. They compartmentalize it. They need to move on. They need to ignore it, get it out of the way, push through.
Yeah.
So it's buried somewhere and it usually, comes out. And so internalizing it can cause depression, anxiety, guardedness, anger, resentment, like all these things over time that aren't going to go away.
Mhm.
Or it's external as like they just, throw themselves into work and maybe they're irritable or maybe let's say it's a breakup from a relationship, they might like jump into a rebound and feel happy momentarily because like they have a new distraction.
Right.
But even in that relationship, there's going to be some things that come up because they haven't resolved their past.
Yeah.
So taking time to just sit in the difficult feelings without feeling threatened by them.
Almost
Um,
applying a bit of curiosity to.
yeah. So it's like, okay. And this doesn't mean staying stuck in them for 24 hours. Like that's not right. You do have to have positive things. You do have to have distractions. Um, but be okay. Like acknowledge, like you're saying, observe, like, okay, here's what I'm feeling. Where is this coming from? Well, it's because I did this. But is that affecting me because I have core beliefs?
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
Right.
Yep.
So I've been very shocked in the past. I worked I don't see couples now, but I worked with couples in the past and they had both cheated on each other. And but when he had cheated, she's like, well, I for like it happened 2 weeks ago. I have forgiven him. And I looked at her and I said, why have you forgiven him so soon? And it's this idea of I'm afraid he's going to leave if I'm angry about this. Like, so
Wow.
it is coming back to core beliefs and her own self-esteem, right? I don't deserve better than this. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. But so sometimes even like forgiveness in an instant, like is not a healthy thing.
Right. Right.
And
Oh man,
even,
that's go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, I know you're thinking.
Yeah.
So anger, a lot of people feel like anger is wrong in the church. So a lot of Christian people feel like anger is wrong. Now it's this like misconception of, well, it's the only appropriate feeling that men are allowed to have, right? But
Right.
no Christian should be angry.
Yeah.
So it's all misconstrued, when in fact, if anger is not part of the healing process, then a lot of times, again, it comes back to self-worth, because if an injustice has been done in some way, you should be angry.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't experience anger when anger should be there, like that's a sign of deeper core beliefs about yourself.
Wow.
So, and I know I'm going into so many layers here, but working through healing. So first of all is, there's these stages of healing, survival mode. And then it moves into, oh, like, okay, I can do this. Oh, no, I can't, because I just got triggered and I just had regression, like some good days, some bad days.
Right.
But the frequency, when we look at progress in any way, this is in healing, progress in changing a bad habit or a pattern or just how you think, three things can kind of be like this tool to use as, a measuring stick. So if the frequency is different, so maybe you're having less bad days than good days,
Right.
then there's progress. Or if you're maybe, slipping up less in this bad habit, then it's progress. So frequency, intensity, if the intensity is different, then it's still progress. So those who are working on, I don't know, feel like healing from some kind of heart emotion or anxiety or even anger, like if the intensity of those feelings is different, then it's progress. And then the recovery. So if you are able to come out of it faster than you used to, then it's progress. So if any of those are different, then it's progress.
Yeah.
So being able to look at, because when we feel regressions, like one step forward, two steps back, like it feels so discouraging and hopeless. But wait a minute, it's not starting from day one, because look at the 10 days you just got through that went pretty decently. And even though this one,
could that be a place for someone as they're journaling, to keeping a record so that they have something they can reflect back on? Is that?
Yeah, I always encourage that too, especially when it's, let's say somebody's dealing with depression or having a lot of like, life is bad, this sucks, like this is horrible. Like, yeah, let's journal about like every day, so that when you look back and on that day that you feel like, see, this is what I'm talking about, life is not good, then you have a record of how many good days you actually had, which combats that belief or that thought, that isn't accurate.
Yeah.
So journaling is really helpful through the process. Some people don't like to write, and it's not the only thing to do, but a lot of times once people get into it, like they really find it to be a good outlet. I know I've used journaling. I'm not the person who journals every day, so I get it, but if I'm struggling with something, like I'm probably going to write about it. And I've written some letters that I have not sent because the purpose is not to give letters to others when you're journaling, but can you express yourself?
Yeah.
Can you get something? It's a good outlet.
Yeah.
And Google is a great resource for prompts, journaling prompts.
Okay.
So if a lot of times when we're like feeling so chaotic inside, we don't know like how to even start journaling, then I sometimes provide guided journaling exercises or guide them to something on the internet. There's journaling prompts for depression, journaling prompts for any topic you can think of, self-growth, self-awareness, betrayal, like healing. So that's helpful. It helps you organize your thoughts and feelings. And when you put it on paper, it gets it out. But a couple of things can happen when we journal. So it can be a relief because it's a good outlet.
Yep.
It also makes it real because now it's in writing, right?
Yeah.
And that can be difficult. So sometimes when I would say more so when somebody's journaling about something from the past that they've been in denial or been trying to avoid,
Mhm.
and they're journaling about that, which I usually have them do, because we need to bring it up. Just because it's difficult to put it on paper doesn't mean it's not necessary.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
bringing it up, in that way, putting it on paper, now you're seeing it, you're writing it. I have them read it to me. They're saying it out loud. Like all of these steps are very difficult, but relieving and necessary. So it's like the person who doesn't want to go through heart surgery, they don't want to be cut open, but they need a surgery so that they can get better. So going through that process is hard, but it's a better outcome in the long run.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot. I
Yeah.
know that there's probably even more. And for those who are watching, we'll have Anita's contact information in the description of the video if you want to reach out and maybe continue it on, if you will. So I want to pivot, Anita, to I'm very big, and it's probably because of some of the hard lessons I learned when I was in corporate America about being very proactive in what I do to care for this gift that God has given me called life. And I fill in that blank with, whether it's my physical health, my mental health, of course, nutritional health, social health, all those things.
Mhm.
I want to be as strong and I want to be as healthy as possible. And I want to make it very clear because I've had some that have kind of said, well, Eric, you could still end up having a heart attack tomorrow, even with you doing well. This is not like an insurance policy. Okay. This is, I do. And if I drop from a heart attack, Anita, and I meet the Lord face to face, when he asked me about what did you do with your physical? What did you do with your mental? I want to be able to look him in the eye. I didn't do it perfectly, but I tried. I did my best. I want that. I want him to hear that from my lips. Now, I'm not projecting onto the audience that, hey, then you must do what I do. That's not my point. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits and value about specifically nutrition or diet and exercise. And everyone out there watching, we're not going to get into the weeds. We're not going to talk about how certain foods affect certain neurons and how you have to be careful to stay away from X, Y. That's not where I'm going. I just want to talk about some of the benefits of exercise and nutrition and specifically to how it impacts how we care for ourselves from the mental perspective.
Yeah, because it's all tied together. And I think that's what you're recognizing. There's a tie to all of it and how we feel. So I sent you that document so we can go over that a little bit.
Yeah, let me pull that up. And if I can find it. There we go. All right.
This was something that was given to me. It looks like it comes from a book, a specific book. I have not read the book, but I have found these kind of tips and tricks to be pretty insightful. So when it says that selfish happy chemicals is not talking about somebody being selfish. It just means the endorphins and the dopamine are chemicals that can be produced on your own. You don't need other people to be involved.
Okay.
So, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but the endorphins, we all have heard about the runner's high. So that's coming from that aspect. It's the one when you're in a car accident or you have an injury, it's flooding your body so that you don't feel that pain. So you can get through that moment until you get to the hospital. Kind of like that internal morphine that the body produces. So coming from hard work and laughter is biblical, like laughter is good like a medicine. And here's why. God's given us these endorphins. So the dopamine one is one that most of us know about. So this is when, okay, I don't want to go to the gym today, but I'm going to force myself. And, oh, look, I just did, 20 reps of this. Now I'm starting to feel better. Or at the end of the hour workout, oh, I feel really good now. That's coming from those dopamine levels that have been increased. And I highly suggest, when I talk to clients, going, every assessment I do, or most of them, I ask, what are your hobbies and interests? And I pick up if there's physical exercise involved, because it is so beneficial. Just moving your body is so beneficial to feeling better. So it helped. The dopamine is what we get when we're accomplishing things.
Yep.
We get it from eating, which is why, eating can become an addiction as well, because we're, like these dopamine hits that we get from eating. Social media refers to that. Like, people want to see how many likes, how many messages, like, are they getting popular, or are people noticing? Like, those dopamine hits feel really good. And so because of the addictive aspect that can happen, we just have to be careful about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's certainly the dynamic here that there can be a dark side to some of these chemicals. Because you alluded to it, I think, in the beginning, Anita, our brains are not moralist, right? I know you didn't use that term, but our brains are not going to come to us and say, hey, Eric, I think you're spending too much time on social media because you're getting dopamine in a way that's not helping you. And what I have found, right, the scrolling disease, right? I mean, your brain can get really good at something that's not helping you. So
yes.
I think you're right, we do have to be careful with it. Would you call dopamine, maybe it's almost like a motivation chemical, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And so, because it feels good that you just did that thing, you want to do it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with drug addiction, or alcohol addiction, or any type video game, like any Facebook addiction, right? It's like this flood of dopamine that causes us, to want more and more and more, which is a good segue into, like, the ones underneath is the selfless chemicals are ones that you use with other people, the serotonin and the oxytocin. But I do want to say, what's not on this list that I just know is that serotonin is the chemical that it helps us regulate our appetite. So it lets you know when you've had enough to eat. So I know in the past, we probably have all experienced, oh my gosh, I ate too much. Now I feel sick, like my stomach hurts.
Yeah.
And because we eat so fast and we're not paying attention. And I heard somebody, this must have been 20 years ago, a friend of mine said that they heard from somebody else. If you stop when you're satisfied instead of when you're full, then you'll lose weight. Right. And so I started to pay attention. First of all, like, let's slow down. Let's pay attention. Am I still hungry? I'm not, which means I'm satisfied.
Yeah. Wow. That is a great tip. It's almost a way of, because I'm not one to, I'm not a big fan of, like, when you hear people who are using outward appearance as the motivation to lose weight. I'm going to start going to the gym because I need to lose weight. And I don't want to rob anybody of the right, if their doctor and that person have agreed that, yeah, you do need to lose weight because of X threat or X potential problem. But I think, like what you just described, Anita, that's just kind of, well, why would I want to eat when I'm not satisfied, when I'm already satisfied? What would be the purpose?
Yeah. So it's that dopamine part, for one, is like, oh, it feels good to eat.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's habit. Like, it's kind of American culture. I grew up, my parents were like the clean platers. Right. You eat what's on your plate. It doesn't matter if you took too much. Now you're going to punish yourself by eating that. And I totally disagree with that philosophy. I agree you should only put on your plate what you want, but I don't agree that you should overstuff yourself to punish the fact that you put too much on your plate. It goes to one waste or the other. I prefer that to be in the waste can, the trash, rather
Right.
than on my waste.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's funny as you say that, because it's these neural pathways that we build. And I know growing up in my family, my mom made dessert that would carry us through an entire week. And it was always, you had your dinner and then you had dessert. And that was rinse and repeat for 18, 20 years or whatever. And I remember when I first kind of like, I had done enough research to satisfy me that sugar was not so good for me, right? And when I tried to stop, oh my gosh, Anita, it was, I mean, I found myself after dinners going and looking for sweets.
Yeah, of course.
But and it wasn't because I was like, oh my gosh, I really, really want chocolate cake. I'm just gonna have it. It was almost like, oh, now it's time for me to find something sweet.
Yeah.
It was that neural pathway.
Yep.
So, to your point.
Yeah.
All right, I kind of cut you off. So keep going with
Yeah. So one more thing I'll say about like food or drinking is serotonin is the thing that's missing for alcoholics. Serotonin lets somebody know when they've had enough to drink, and the alcoholic does not feel that satisfaction that serotonin gives. So their levels are off. So somebody might, sit down for dinner and have 1 or 2 beers and they're fine. Like that's all they need. The alcoholic, they don't feel that satisfaction by having 1 or 2.
Gotcha.
So the serotonin then is, it keeps us, what this is describing is kind of, it keeps us accountable to other people sometimes in a good way. So somebody gives you, let's say somebody gives you $100 to pay a certain bill. Well, now you feel an obligation to use it for that because that's what they wanted it to be for. But that's an accountability factor that lets you know, okay, I'm going to respect this person and what they wanted. So I'm going to use that money in this way. Okay. So serotonin does that for us. It reinforces the bond in that way to be loyal and accountable to others. It lets us know that people like us and respect, like it feels good, like to receive, that invitation to something. Oh, they like that feels good. So that's not necessarily that dopamine hit, but this is serotonin. So it's referring to when somebody's cheering you on versus doing it alone. So, which is why there are crowds at every sporting event, because it feels good to have somebody rooting for you. So sporting events, people who run marathons or 5Ks or just do some kind of there's a reason why we do speaking events in person rather than on Videocast all the time, because it's rewarding to feel like, oh, they're appreciating what I'm saying, or the interaction that you get afterwards and things like that. So that's what serotonin does. Okay. Oxytocin, like here's the love hormone. Okay. So, and it doesn't talk about this, but this is kind of the catalyst for why it's different a lot of times in male and female regarding sex. So the female's oxytocin level is much higher during a sexual encounter than for a male, especially before there's that strong commitment that's there. So, we've all heard of the girl who's going around, sleeping with people, but he sleeps with her and then he dumps her, but she thought that he loved her because she got the oxytocin. Okay. Wow. The oxytocin said, we have a bond here. He really cares about me. And that wasn't what was happening for him. And Anita,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Because it's just like, would you say then and I know many people have made the mistake of having sex outside of the bonds of marriage. But wow, could this be one of the reasons why God intended it to be only inside of
absolutely. Because there's no true foundation right? When you're having sex too soon, like all those building blocks of having the relationship where it needs to be, isn't present. So now I also don't necessarily agree with the fact that if you've had sex, you're bound to that person forever, like these, spiritual bonds, because I don't agree with that, because like that's, God has grace. God has grace for these things. But yeah, when sex happens before the foundations of trust, of stability, of consistency, of truly being cared for, then it's not healthy.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Okay. So, but oxytocin is the thing that develops those true lifelong friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you that motivation to be generous, to be empathetic towards others, and to just build strong connectedness. Oxytocin is the thing that keeps you in a marriage when you don't feel like you love somebody that day, right? Or in a relationship, or at, whatever friendships that you have that might not be, let's say somebody's in a fight. Well, oxytocin helps the commitment be there.
Wow.
Even when the feelings are not. So it's very binding, in a good way,
Yeah. Oh,
although it can be, like we've said, unhealthy, because there's codependency and stuff like that, a lot of times in people's lives. But so then if you want to go to the last one, which is
one
the
thing
enemy.
I was going to mention to you inside of the oxytocin, and I just
Yeah.
noticed it in the list: boost immune system.
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer, not believer is not really the right way to say it. I am an absolute champion for the strengthening of our immune system.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize that oxytocin it plays a role in that.
Well, when we think about, we've read articles in which, okay, married people live longer because they seem to be more satisfied in life. Now, I don't know how, this idea that everybody has to be married to truly be happy. I don't agree with that, but it's because of the core relationship. That's what it's referring to. Having lifelong friendships, being social, having those, like, knowing you can call somebody in the middle of the night and they're going to show up for you, that increases your immune system. So it's that well-being, that mental well-being that affects, see, our hormones affect. Oh, something I failed to mention on the serotonin, is that most of it's produced in the gut, which is why food matters. So
I'm sorry, Anita, because I know our time is coming short, but oh my gosh, maybe a part 3, because you just hit on something that it really makes you think a little bit differently about the food that you put into your body. Wow.
It really does. And, people who get up and drink a Mountain Dew or have Pop-Tarts, like, they're not setting themselves up for the best that they could be. They might not feel horrible, depending like how resilient they are physically, but it's going to catch up eventually. And they're just not being at their best, when you don't have. And I love dessert myself, so I get it, but I definitely want apples and bananas and frozen vegetables for my meals. And it makes a difference. And there's if as somebody's suffering from depression, like, you can just Google like foods that are good for depression, because of the serotonin that's developed in our gut, more so than in our brain, but it has the same impact for how we feel mentally. So it definitely makes a difference.
Wow.
So the cortisol is the stress hormone. It's very protective. It's what helps that dad lift a car off of his child, right? Or the mom, push the piano out of the way, or whatever, these big things are. It's that fight or flight or freeze state that allows us to get to safety. However, when it's too consistent, so PTSD makes cortisol there too much of the time, because the brain, again, doesn't realize that the threat is past. but
Right.
there's still association there. So it, you know, increases blood pressure, inflammatory responses, impairs cognitive ability. So when people are under high stress, whether it's a trauma, whether it's too much stress at work, they're feeling overwhelmed in life, you know, young moms, like whatever the situation is, like memory, like you walk into the other room and forget what you're doing when you're only like 35 years old, but it's because of the stress, right? So it's really important.
I'm sorry, because you know, someone had referred me to this article, and I don't remember who the author was, but they were talking about, you know, how the way that we're designed, and I'm going to probably butcher this, Anita, so feel free if there's some course correction you need to give me. So our cortisol levels are at its highest at the beginning of the day. And that kind of makes sense because we're taking on the day. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I'm going to be seeing this. I'm going to be seeing that. And your cortisol levels are there at that height. But as the day goes on, and as we get toward dinner time and such, they start to drop. And he said the fascinating thing is that there's a reason behind them dropping. And he said, that's another reason, Eric, why you shouldn't be eating like these huge meals for dinner, because you're interfering with, you're starting to wind down. That's how God intended it. Because once you pass 6 o'clock at night, toward 7 o'clock, you're moving toward bedtime. And he said, if you are in this place of where you're still thinking about work, or you get into an argument with a family member, and you're just going back and forth, and it becomes like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, you're basically, your cortisols are rising again. And they don't just go up and down like a light switch. And he says, think about the sleep impact of that. And the moral of his advice was, do everything you can to make that window of time as they're dropping to be as stress-free as you can make it, within reason, obviously. But
yeah, I have to tell you, I'm not familiar with that being at the beginning of the day, but I imagine it would be because there's a certain level of stress that is good for us. Right. So the pressure of, oh, I got to get to work on time, like that motivates you to get to work. And so maybe that's maybe that's what he's referring to. I'm wondering, because you shouldn't wake up in a state of PTSD, not that kind of cortisol.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So, and serotonin is produced while we sleep, which is why we wake up refreshed and motivated. So I'm imagining he's saying the level of stress, the cortisol hormone, is at a healthy place in the morning because it helps you get things done.
Yeah, exactly, Anita, because, you know, as I'm thinking back to that, it was kind of that idea, you know, that, you know, Eric, we don't live in a healthy society. We don't embrace it. And whether that's physical, mental, spiritual, we don't. And he said, I mean, it was ultimately the message of, you should be living your life in such a way that your levels match a healthy lifestyle.
Right. Which is why it's important to take care of our mental health, because if we don't keep these cortisol levels managed, then we're, you know, that's why people wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety, is because their cortisol is not where it should be. So, or you're breaking down in the middle of the day, you know, emotionally or in anger, because cortisol levels are not managed. So taking care of yourself is really, really important.
So as we get to a close here, I do want to say one thing that I think is important to stress, and I know you agree with me in this. See, I'm going out on the limb that you're going to agree with what I'm about to say. So,
you're so trusting.
I was going to say, right? So for those who are watching the video, we understand that we all have our challenges. We all have our things that we thought we'd be in a better place, and we find it difficult. That's where God's grace comes in. And that's why he's so patient. And I want to stress, you know, Anita, when I think of God's patience, I don't think of it as in, okay, I'll wait another hour for you. I see a patience as that Savior who experienced all of the things that I'm struggling with, understands what it means to be challenged and all the different things we counter every day. And I'm saying it this way as we get to a close is because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to attempt something and you're going to forget it. And then you're going to, well, I was going to start journaling, but then my mom called and said she needs me to do. Don't be hard on yourself.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's okay. Here's what I always tell in my work when we talk to clients, and they'll kind of query, well, how do I know this can work? And I'll say to them, the only people that this will not work for are those that don't want to work on themselves. I tell them, Anita, if you don't want to work on yourself, this is a colossal waste of your time. And there's nothing I'm going to be able to say, no tool, no idea, no article is going to help. But if you want to work on yourself, maybe you're going to work on 10 minutes. Maybe the person in your family is going to work 20. Maybe I work 5. Maybe Anita works an hour. If we all are working on this, I think we feel real confident you're going to get great results.
Yeah. And the thing that I've, noticed, counseling numerous people and probably in my own life is there's a snowball effect in a positive way when we start to make changes. So we usually associate that snowball effect with negative decision making, and it, rolls out of control. But the snowball effect in positive outcomes is you start to work on something, you find some freedom and healing in that area, and then your self-awareness and insight increases, which allows room to work on another area, and then the next area, and then the next, and now you're working on a few different areas that you didn't even anticipate could be improved, but you're seeing it differently. And it's really, really rewarding to see those kind of outcomes.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Anita, I can't thank you enough for coming on for a second video cast. I've truly enjoyed it. I hope our audience will as well. And for those out there who are watching and listening, again, I'll have contact information in the video description for Anita. And if you want to get a hold of her directly, and then certainly, Anita, this won't be the last. I have other invites waiting, but I'm gonna say I just appreciate you taking the time out for us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.